Good afternoon. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Live Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine. And hey, thanks for coming on today. We got we got a great show, first of all, fantastic show. I'm super excited about this one. But of course, we've got some stuff happening in the news. A serious Hurricane Ian uh, just created just a massive amount of damage down in Florida, and we'll discuss that a little bit. Um, we have Dr. David Kraus is coming on as our guest today, so we're real excited to have him. And we'll be right back with you just in a moment after we get a brief message from our sponsors. All right. So many of you are watching the show via our portals. Of course, our home base is healthyindoors.com. That's where we have our magazine, Healthy Indoors, digital monthly publication, and a bunch of other stuff. A lot of back end information there. But you probably most of you are watching us on the Healthy Indoors online global community. This is a platform we launched a while back, and it's just a very unique platform that if you're not part of it, you should check it out. It allows you to network. Meet with other individuals around the industry and like professions or various vertical professions. It's just a great platform. We're going to be doing a lot more there. One of the things that we have been doing lately is what's called, this is for members of the Healthy Indoors community. It's called the Ask Me Anything events. We just completed our last one yesterday. Actually, we had Jeff May was on there for an hour answering questions with a live audience. So that was actually a really great time, very informative. Again, all of you members of the community have access to all those recordings. You can get to that, and that's excellent. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest. So, he is shouldn't actually need introduction. He's no stranger to our program. He's probably the reigning champion of appearances. I'm pretty certain he is. But Dr. David Kraus is a certified industrial hygienist. He spent many years working in public health as the head IAQ guy for the state of Florida. He's going to really laugh when he comes on in the way I mentioned that. But he's the founder of HC3, which is healthcare consulting and contracting based in Tallahassee, Florida. David has been involved and instrumental in so many documents and committees in this industry on so many topics. Just has a wealth of knowledge, and hey, he's a nice guy, So, David, how are you?
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. I'm doing well, and thank goodness have unlike most of the state, not much impact from the hurricanes.
Yeah, that's really fortunate, Dave, that you're out of the bandwidth of most of it. You said just sunny day there today, right?
Yeah, it's funny how they work. The way they spin, that actually drew nice, cool, dry air down from the north. So Tallahassee was spared the any adverse effects from the hurricane this time.
So I guess maybe we'll lead off with this story because it's currently still developing. Obviously the storm has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, correct? For the time being.
Yeah, it's likely to gain some strength as it gets back out over the Atlantic and before it hits the Atlantic seacoast. But right now in Florida, we're really looking at the disaster after the disasters, with carbon monoxide issues that inevitably arise, electrical, problems from electrocutions and hazards from reentering these areas. So, the danger isn't over for folks, and I hope everybody who's both responding and affected by this takes care.
And that's a I think a big point to make is that the actual hurricane itself, is moving through. It's no longer considered a hurricane, but what we're dealing with is the aftermath, right? And the water, the flooding and the issues that occur with that are substantial, right? And this isn't something that just passes over and hey, it's all great.
That's correct. That's correct. Inevitably, we went through this. in 2018 with Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle, and it was many months of injuries, hazards, and fatalities that occurred after the hurricanes. So you're expecting that in a very highly populated area of South and Central Florida. Um, and the impacts are both acute. The short term, you're going to have the recovery efforts. Heat stress and medical emergencies. Roadways to the hospitals are blocked. You have inevitably carbon monoxide issues that arise from generator use. And then beyond that, kind of what we'll talk about later today are the impacts on the infrastructure, including our drinking water systems and healthcare systems.
Sure, and that's, again, these are things that just don't get cleared up immediately. After one of these catastrophic events, there's, I mean, months, if not years, before everything's back where it should be, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
We certainly, in South Florida, uh, several hurricanes ago, um, with some of the heat stress and problems with assisted living facilities and nursing homes, there was a requirement in the state to have all nursing homes and long-term care facilities have generators installed and they're required fuel to run them to protect the patients and the people who stay there. So we'll see how well that program serves the people in need, and so they're not basically sitting there for weeks or months on end, suffering from heat-induced stress and other medical emergencies related to that.
and
So
in Florida, September, late September going into October, it's still hot down there, right? It's not. I mean, I'm up here in Syracuse, so for me, we're freezing our butts off now. So I'm not, air conditioning is the furthest thought from my mind right now. Um, but down there, not so much, right? You're still in cooling mode.
exactly, exactly. Well, in the central and south part of the state, you're in cooling mode 12 months of the year. So, especially after a hurricane, where a lot of you know heat and humidity are certainly pulled up from southern climes, and the humidity is I guess one of the toughest part is to make sure that because that just magnifies the heat that people are exposed to. So, but yeah, it's going to be a tough one, and it's a narrow corridor. Everything has to be brought down basically one of two roads, I-75 or I-95, and we'll see how much of those were impacted. And of course, Fort Myers, they lost some bridges and other infrastructure necessary to even get to some of the barrier islands.
So, and they did call for an evacuation of what 2.5 million people. And I know you and I had a discussion about that yesterday. It's like that's great to like say, get out of the way, you're going to be fine. But moving 2.5 million people in a couple days, logistically, not the easiest thing in the world. Many people don't have the ability to transport themselves and don't have the funds to be able to, where do they transport to and where do they stay? I
Yeah,
don't think you have
yeah,
2.5 million open hotel rooms just sitting there waiting for them.
yeah. And many of those areas that they would normally evacuate to were in the line of the hurricane
Right.
themselves. So we actually had some friends in the Fort Myers area who one of them had recently had back surgery and just really couldn't effectively evacuate, and they wouldn't readmit him back to the hospital. So kind of stuck. Luckily, it turned out well for them. They, minimal damage to their home, and they were far enough inland so that they didn't experience a storm surge. But we were all worried for them for a while.
That's good. Yeah, and I have family there too as well. So yeah, it's I mean it's a big concern. I mean, and we're not, like we've had this conversation in the past where this isn't, you know, it may be one of the worst ones, but it's certainly not going to be one of the last ones. We're going to be facing these type of weather related catastrophes probably ramping up more and more just based on what's going on the planet. So yeah. So anyway, our thoughts are going out to everybody down in Florida who are dealing with, these issues. So, so the story, I guess, like our big feature that we, wanted to discuss with you today is, of course, Legionella. And for those of you in the audience that may not know this, David's actually one of the principal authors of the new AIHA guideline, right? Recognition, evaluation, and control of Legionella. He was involved in that for a long time. Dave's been involved in Legionella issues for a very long time. Certainly one of the nation's experts on this topic. So on, on that note,
On that note,
on that note, um, this is something more than an event that just happened in what 1976 in Philadelphia, right at a convention.
well, waterborne pathogens really started public health. Cholera and typhoid. You think about public health started with John Snow removing a pump handle to try to reduce the incidence of cholera. Um, so, bacteria, viruses in water have really been around for a long time and continue to be a big problem in both, the United States and developing countries around the world. So, we've certainly improved things and changed things by the way we treated water, um, and establishing some regulatory framework and rules and laws in the United States. But um, each time we go to fix one thing, we tend to create another unintended adverse effect, and so there's always a push pull on that continuum.
So, the AIHA Legionella guide came out. Well, officially, it came out back in June, correct? That was when it was
Well,
released.
the first edition was published in May of 2015. And after that met with a lot of success, and a lot of people have used that to help establish frameworks and to um, evaluate buildings for sources and contaminant, and to help control that.
Mhm.
Um, since 2015, we got to 2018, and a lot had happened in those intervening 3 years. Um, ASHRAE's standard 188 had been released. CMS, the Centers for Medicare Medicaid Services, um, had been released. So some mandates requiring water monitoring for waterborne pathogens and control of it in healthcare settings and long-term care facilities. New York City outbreak in 2015. Regulations in New York State and New York City that came out of that. I mean, it's just been one after another.
Mhm.
Case rates increased up until 2018 to almost 10,000 cases per year. So, the authors of the guideline felt that it was time for an update. And, with how easy things were during the pandemic, um, we took the time and actually did an update of the guideline, which now the second edition has been published in and is available now, and was released I think here in April or June. I forget the month it was finally finished, but yeah, just this year. So it's much more robust. It went from, I think, 37 pages to well over 100 pages in size, and we've really taken some steps forward on tables and interpretive criteria and guidelines for users as well.
So, where can people get copies of this? Through AIHA, right through their website.
Exactly. It's available, I think, for a modest amount at the AIHA bookstore. And we recommend that people actually, if they purchase this, to also get the Legionella Framework Body of Knowledge document. That is for free. You do have to register, but it's available for free, and it lays out the competencies, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that people should possess and be able to demonstrate in order to successfully carry out assessments, monitoring, and testing for Legionella.
So that leads, to a nice segue here is what are the core competencies and currently people that do testing and do some of the remediation work for Legionella, you know, what are the qualifications required, and how qualified are these individuals you know,
Buyer
yeah.
beware. Buyer beware. Um, right now, there is no, actually, there's no credential in the United States. There are credentials in Great Britain and some of the Commonwealth countries, but within the United States, There's no, if you have an engineering degree or a certified industrial hygienist, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the background, experience, knowledge, education, training, expertise in order to design a sampling strategy, to evaluate sources, to successfully and effectively collect samples and measurements so that you can make sense of the information. Frankly, um, it is buyer beware. And we see, I get involved in quite a few litigation cases, looking back at the first responder, the first people who showed up on site, and they're frankly often just local and figured they could figure it out on the way. So that's part of the reason that we developed the Legionella technical framework or body of knowledge, so that professionals who want to put themselves out there as that expert can see how to improve their knowledge and what they need to know, and how they need to take care of that. For those who do the remediation or hyperchlorination and disinfection, it varies per state. Some states require you to be, a water. Uh, they have various licenses, but essentially to be someone who works on water systems. Some of them are HVAC contractors who would work on cooling towers. Some, like in Florida, really technically, if you're applying a pesticide or a biocide to water systems, you need to have a pesticide license. So, you wouldn't think about calling the local, termite company to come treat your water, but that may be who has to do it. So it is inconsistent at best, and just a hot mess at worst, and as far as finding who can do the work.
And so these recommendations, this is by AIHA, right? As far as recommendations for the body of knowledge, would make sense for somebody to be a qualified professional on either side of it, right? The consulting, the testing, or the actual treatment.
Yes.
But currently, there's still no real unified requirements anywhere in this country. Like you said, you've got some state by state and maybe locale licensing, but um, so, and do you see that on the horizon that they'll actually is there a push here anyway,
I think
for a
eventually
national standard?
some organization will establish a credential. um, I think it's ASSE has established something along with IAPMO, which is a plumbing and mechanical organization, um, that has I think a 2 or 3 day training course and some basic guidelines on how to assess water sources and collect samples. That really, they call it a professional certification, but it's not to demean it at all, but it's really more of a technician level, someone who is capable and competent to, collect a sample and not mess it up, send it to a laboratory that's qualified, um, and then to receive the results. And how to design a sampling strategy and interpret the results, that's really a higher level of training and education and background, um, that I don't think there's any current credential out there or organization offering a credential for that.
And that's kind of a problem because this is to properly, like you said, to design that strategy on how you're going to do it. A lot more complicated than, for example, somebody walking in and maybe taking an air sample for asbestos or taking a spore trap for mold. Although there's strategies involved with all that, but I think this is a much more complex
Well,
issue,
well,
right?
it's wholly unregulated,
Right.
which,
Yeah.
to begin with, makes it more complicated.
Sure.
There's no clear standards or risk based criteria to say you're above or below a certain threshold. Even more concerning right now is the long-term treatment. So in the event that you do either have an outbreak or you find you have to control Legionella within a building's water system, and when I say Legionella, it's not just Legionella. Often there are many other waterborne pathogens that come along with this. So we often use Legionella as a shorthand. But if you've got bacteria or viruses in your water that can make people sick, you need to do something about it. And what we're finding is that if a building or a facility, a hospital, a school, a university, an apartment complex, an office building, if they need to add supplemental treatment to their water because they're not getting enough from the city or the municipal water supply, they strictly fall under the Safe Drinking Water Act, the US EPA Safe Drinking Water Act. And that triggers a whole series of regulatory requirements that are, frankly, often contradictory and unrelated, but you still have to comply with them. They're inconsistently applied from state to state. So what New York, California, and Georgia require are entirely different, even though they, in theory, are all complying with the same federal law. So each state primacy agency implements it and interprets the implementation entirely differently. So for the business owners and the operators and consultants, you do this enough times and you pull your hair out just like I did.
Full disclosure, I knew Dr. David Krause while he still had hair.
Yeah,
I knew you when you were a young man.
I'm
Well,
still a young man, relatively speaking.
I, yeah, okay, all right, yeah. I mean, well,
I'm
compared to
younger than
me,
you.
yeah. I mean, compared to me, you're a young guy. I mean, it's like but,
Uh,
but
so that's what's really strange in this is that we've got these regulatory frameworks that are being blindly applied,
mhm.
almost misapplied to this
And why?
requirement.
Why is that? I mean, because you've cited that
The
before on
frankly,
previous shows.
the Safe Drinking Water Act was written and brought and implemented into the law before we even knew Legionella pneumophila even existed. 1974 is the date of the um, implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we didn't even know Legionella existed until really 1970, let's call it 76, 77, when the outbreak was being investigated
Mhm.
at the Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia. So, the world has surpassed, the events have surpassed and overtaken the realities of the laws and the statutes haven't successfully changed. They haven't kept up with science or the realities of our times. So we're often taking a square peg and trying to fit it into a round hole, and it's frustrating. It's a waste of time and effort. And my biggest uh, uh, complaint about it is that you have to implement regulatory requirements that are totally irrelevant to what
Yeah.
you're trying to do. They make you test for things that weren't the problem, but don't require you to test for the organism that you were trying to control with the treatment system. So it's a bit confounding.
And Legionella contamination in in our water systems, right? That's prevalent, a lot more prevalent than I think people realize, right? And the subsequent outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease happen a lot more than we think too, right? I mean, than the general public probably realizes. CDC,
Well,
I think, estimates what 5 to 20,000 a year, but they know they're undercounting that, right?
oh yeah, yeah. They've been undercounting it for years, and they've been using a odd estimate of the actual numbers and misapplying that for a while as well. So, um, yeah, I guess the most recent thing is that the National Academies of Science in 2019 they really looked at this with a committee, and they estimated that the true numbers, the actual numbers, are probably closer to between 52 and 70,000 cases per year.
And those the percentage of death of those cases is fairly high, right? This is like a 10 to 20% mortality rate ish.
Yeah, for what we call community acquired cases, so where you have
Mhm.
outbreaks or cases that occur not in healthcare systems, um, we consider that fatality rate's around 10%, 1 in 10. And then for those people who contracted either in nursing homes or in hospitals, the fatality rate's about 1 in 4, so about
Wow.
25%. So
So this is a very significant issue here we're talking about.
if you catch it, yes, it's a very significant issue.
Yeah.
It's underdiagnosed, and there's a lot of efforts that have been brought forward to try to take care of this and do better and improve it. I think the CMS mandate in 2017 is one of those efforts. Yet it was kind of pushed out without any notice, warning. Um, guidance on how to successfully implement it, and it's taken a lot of facilities by surprise. And frankly, many don't implement it, or if they implement it, it's pro forma. It's a paper drill,
Mhm.
and they're just often whistling past the graveyard.
And why is it underdiagnosed? I mean, in your opinion,
Well,
why don't we really
I,
have accurate numbers?
a lot of the problems that we've seen with Legionnaire's disease and how public health has dealt with it are the exact same that we then saw in a larger scale with COVID. So, somebody gets pneumonia, you have to do a specific test in order to determine if they had COVID, right? So, same thing with Legionnaires. If somebody has pneumonia, the physician has to order a specific test to determine if they have pneumonia caused by Legionnaire's disease. So most of the time, they just treat them and just with whatever drugs they think were going to work and hope for the best. Most of the time, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, then they often start looking at Legionnaires. Um, so that's one of the big things is that public health doesn't have control over the um, clinicians who are collecting those, ordering those tests.
And again, you're not going to see these clusters, right, from an epidemiological standpoint, unless they're all reported to maybe the same medical facility, right? Because there's not good tracking from from all the different points where somebody could be seen, right? It seems like when
Well,
most of the incidences that come up, that, that you're aware of, that make public, publicly, or you're aware of, usually are something that happens in a cluster that's identifiable.
96% of cases that are reported every year are deemed to not be part of an outbreak.
Oh boy.
So, to tie them together as an outbreak, it really has to be obvious and in your face as an epidemiologist. Legionnaire's disease was established as a nationally notifiable disease in 1977. It's been that way ever since. It's a fairly loose framework in which there's a lot of ways that cases can not be reported, but there is at least consistency in the errors over time. What I did see though, as a public health official, is that what was in Florida, at least, several people back in the early '90s who were responsible for tracking down and monitoring those diseases through budget cuts and resources and loss of people due to retirements. There's several people became one person to deal with all the Legionnaire's disease cases and the reports. Um, uh, Within the state of Florida, looking out and working with 67 different counties. And then that one person then wasn't just responsible for Legionnaires, but they were responsible for all nationally notifiable diseases. So their workload and the resources going towards them just became disproportionate. So I suspect that reporting has suffered over time. And then, of course, with COVID, where public health officials and public health agencies in general were just swamped with everything else. Frankly, Legionnaire's disease fell off the map. Was not their highest priority.
Mhm.
They had many other things to deal with. People were leaving in droves. So, yeah, I suspect our reporting efforts have suffered with both budget cuts and deterioration of our public health system in general.
So we have an audience question posted, which I'm going to bring up here. Can we discuss the inconsistency to hot mess of environmental concerns? What do you see as an end result of all this unregulation or underregulation?
I don't know that regulation is going to fix much at this point, other than we'll talk a little bit about the regulation of public water systems and municipal water supplies um, that are going to come forward. But because if you don't start with good water coming into the building, it's tough to make it good and safe quality water within the building. But as far as the regulation within treatment providers and consultants, um, yes, we do need some level of competency for everyone involved in order for that to be successfully done. My concern is that we want to avoid what's happened with mold licensing and regulations throughout the country, in which essentially without core competencies, without knowledge, skills, and abilities, or some type of credentialing that is science based, I fear that you may just basically create a license for which unqualified people can become card carrying consultants,
We've certainly done that in
and
mold, no
and
question
that
about
is
it.
exactly what
I
happened with
mean,
mold.
people, I can speak to our state where if you pass a 50 question multiple choice test that was actually authored by the training provider and proctored by the training provider,
Yeah,
that's your
yeah,
core competency. You know,
yeah. You have to start with a foundation, not end with start with the credential and work your way backwards to the core foundations of what you need to know. So, unfortunately, I think we're probably looking at several more years of a bit of a chaotic effort to uh, get our hands wrapped around waterborne pathogen issues and control of that. But the marketplace will probably work its way out.
mm,
And the unfortunate thing is when you have outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease, when you have Legionella contamination, people die.
yeah.
You can literally start counting the bodies. With mold, it's rare, extremely rare, that
Mhm.
somebody actually perishes from that or that you can even prove that. But with Legionnaire's disease, that's usually where you start. You say we have several fatalities and many illnesses and hospitalizations and emergency room visits. Guess we better go figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So that's the definition of reactive rather than proactive. You know,
Well, I
but
mean,
how do you make a
yeah,
paradigm shift? Because again, you say you believe we're a few years out before we can even maybe get those core competencies established in the way they should be. Now, the AIHA guidance for that should be very helpful in helping establish that, right? But who's establishing it though? I mean, you
well,
got uh,
we actually we figured what was proposed as part of that group who prepared that, and it was a really nice cross section of about 50 professionals who applied and participated in this, um, and I was really proud of the outcome. But the technical framework, the core competencies, the KSAs for professionals as well as technicians who would be able to carry out these types of assessments and monitoring and oversight. Um, I think it's well established. I think we're probably 95% of the way there, what needs to be done. The last little bit would be, unique areas of regulatory requirements that inevitably will come forward as well. So, that's a good start. Who's going to offer that credential? I don't know. No, none of the, professional organizations that I'm aware of are doing that right now outside of IAPMO. And that's, again, a very narrow, tailored aspect. It's not all encompassing. So, or ASSE is offering that. But yeah, once you get that established, I think you'll have a better chance of getting a cadre of people who can do those types of assessments. But it's kind of funny because you've got water systems in buildings, but they are in almost every case a receiver of water that is coming from the municipal water supply, which already
mhm,
has an existing technical and regulatory framework
mhm.
under which it's one of the few things we have that's called the Safe Drinking Water Act. And I just, as a risk assessor, my job for many years was as a toxicologist and state toxicologist doing risk assessments, and we talk about this term safe. And it's one of those things. Is how do you define safe? Because people will certainly get up in front of 1,000 of their neighbors and ask you, is it safe to drink this water? Is it safe to breathe this air? Is it safe to eat this food? And how do you define that? Well, actually, the Safe Drinking Water Act and the US EPA does define safe water. And when you read that, it starts a whole series of questions. First is that definition states water that does not contain harmful bacteria or toxic materials or chemicals. Does not contain. Doesn't say contains it below a certain level or doesn't contain it so that it causes health effects. So, by their own definition, no water is safe, which
Okay.
is that's insane.
Right. You
And
can't.
then they
That's
go
not
on
an
to say that
attainable goal, right? I
if
mean,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, then under the Safe Drinking Water Act, they define a contaminant as any physical, chemical, biological, or radiological substance or matter in water. So, by its very definition, all water is contaminated. I
Okay.
guess only a toxicologist would find that funny.
Yeah, well,
Um,
no, but I mean, but it seems like absurd.
it
Just
is. It
yeah.
is. It is by their. This is verbatim out of their own definitions for the EPA. It further says, drinking water may reasonably be expected to contain at least small amounts of some contaminants. Some contaminants may be harmful if consumed at certain levels in drinking water. Okay, but how do you deal with that when you're at when a mother wants to know if it's okay, is it safe to use the water from the tap to make her child's formula? And safe is one of those words. Is it a definable state of being?
Yeah, I mean, say
The
that,
absence of
that's
risk
saying
or
is
harm?
that's like saying, do you have good indoor air quality?
Yes. Is it a transient state of being? I'm safe right now, but will I be safe when I walk out the front door? Or is it just a feeling? People feel safe or they don't feel safe. And
Mhm,
people can feel safe when they're truly not, and
mhm.
people can not feel safe when they're as safe as they're ever going to be. So it's
A
it's
and
it's an
would you I mean, I have to pose this question. Do you think that in general, our municipal water we provide in this I'm speaking to the United States now, is it safe water? Or I mean, because it seems like there's, Flint, Michigan, and you're seeing these others, down in, Mississippi, the Jackson, Mississippi, that bit, which we can talk about that in a moment, but they're not the isolated cases. There was a study published a few years back, or at least a review of information saying that Flint wasn't even in the top worst water systems, municipal water systems in the United States. There's like 2,200 systems that they believe are worse than Flint. How is what? So I ask again: Are we? Do we have safe water?
well, if you define safe under the Safe Drinking Water Act, sure. Where it's expected and defined as being as something that contains some level of contaminants. And the irony is that we know there are things in the water that are not regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act that still pose a health risk. They have a list called the Contaminant Candidate List, and the latest one, the CCL5, under the Safe Drinking Water Act, includes 70 different toxic chemicals and pesticides, 23 disinfectant byproducts, and 12 microbial pathogens, including Legionella and Naegleria fowleri, that are known health hazards that are in municipal drinking water but are not currently regulated.
And again, I think we all labor under this pretense that that our water, there are regulations in place that are being enforced and being, that our water is for the most part safe, and that these Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi situations are the outliers, but that doesn't appear to be the case.
Right. I think you often have to look at it as relatively safe, or it's
Hmm.
safer than it used to be. Um, you know, when we deal with contaminants, in strictly speaking, we control microbial contaminants such as Legionella, E. coli, norovirus in drinking water by adding other contaminants. We add chlorine, monochloramine, copper, silver, whatever the disinfectant is. And by its own definition, those disinfectants are a chemical that's in water.
Right. I mean, it's additive chemistry. So
Yeah, yeah, it's an additive approach to try to fix a problem. Unfortunately, we find that often creates another problem. And so we're often trading that short-term acute risk of bacterial disease with a long-term chronic risk of lead poisoning, arsenic poisoning, um, or increased cancer risk from those efforts to address the short-term risk. So it's a bit of a conundrum, and will get you uh, give you a good headache if you try to work through it many times.
So we have another question from the audience. I want to bring this up. Are you doing any work with PFASs?
Yeah, PFAS.
Yeah.
Well, that's another one. Something that wasn't even recognized as a contaminant until recently, that now has been, as far as its health advisory level, which is non-regulatory so far. But PFAS chemicals are those related to Teflon, Scotch Guard, um, uh, flame retardants, or flame, firefighting equipment and foams that have worked their way into the water system, and our current water treatment technologies don't really remove it. These are chemicals, they're often referred to as forever chemicals because they just travel through the water system, accumulate in people's bodies and blood, and you can find it in every animal, every creature, every person, and just about every drop of water around the world.
Right. They've been
So,
identified as miles deep in the ocean. I mean,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
they're
you're
hitting
when
they're
you're
hitting
finding it
everywhere
in
in the
polar bear
ecosystem
meat,
on the planet.
it's worked its way everywhere. The question on the health effects is still, I would say, unsettled science. There's some concerns and some data suggesting some long-term health effects. I would certainly reserve opinions on that for quite a while. Just because it's there, because it stays there, does that mean it's going to cause these issues? And what are the real lifelong risks for that? But frankly, it's unavoidable at this point. Now, there's some areas that are heavily contaminated where people are, the levels in their body are extremely high. Um, so the dose makes the poison. So that's always the case. But so far, the EPA they've recently released values in the parts per trillion, which are frankly practically, for the most part, even unmeasurable. So they've set exposure limits or source concentrations that would say it's contaminated at levels that are at or below our ability to even detect it. So that's why I say the Safe Drinking Water Act is it's kind of like my old '66 Ford. It's there. It's old. It's behind the times. It definitely desperately needs restoration and updating, and that process is slow and laborious. And I don't know that building owners and operators and people who rely upon abundant, safe, clean, clear, reliable water can wait for that to be fixed and brought up to modern standards. And beyond that, to be able to fix our water infrastructure, our water treatment
Hmm.
plants, our water distribution systems. They are, for the most part, in a horrible shape. We can see the potholes in the roads. We can see the bridges falling down. But we even still drive underneath them and drive on them when in a bridge that is showing severe degradation. If people could see the inside of the water lines that they receive their drinking water from, there would be a public outcry.
And that's another point. That I guess we should get into because we talked about it in pre-show. Um, you know, the some of the treatments, the additive chemical treatments that we're doing, are in and of themselves, like the chlorination is potentially destructive to the plumbing inside the build. The actual infrastructure of our water infrastructure within buildings.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, beginning in 1908, Jersey City, New Jersey began regularly chlorinating its city water. And that resulted in a dramatic decrease in cholera and other infectious diseases that has continued to today. However, chlorine and other oxidant chemicals that are often used to treat that city water, or municipal water, is also corrosive. It creates disinfectant byproducts that are carcinogenic. Um, and taking that technology and applying it directly to buildings, when we need to treat building water systems may not be the smartest thing. I think we need to think that through a little bit more and realize that the adverse outcomes that buildings are not just mini water systems. They are unique. They are different. They're vastly different in how they're operated. That we're heating that water, that recirculating that water, storing that water, using it in ways that in 1908 and in 1974 we never even considered.
Sure.
The water pick wasn't around back then, and breathing in water actually can be a greater risk than drinking it.
Hmm.
So yeah, we've got a lot of inconsistencies, and often the regulatory framework and the regulators in general and public health officials in general will tend to use the rules they have and try to fit them into some cubbyhole rather than saying this just doesn't apply. Let's come up with an entirely different framework or roadmap to begin with. And I think we're going to kind of be stuck with that. Um, there's efforts to try to still tweak, adjust the current requirements and frameworks for individuals who maintain and operate water treatment systems.
Hmm.
Right now, the regulations really say that someone who operates a water treatment system in a building has to be trained and certified to operate a water treatment system for a city or municipality. Well, their training and their education and their experience has, frankly, nothing to do with what goes on inside of a building.
Sure. I mean, because like you mentioned earlier, they're in pre-show, they're distributing. Municipalities is one directional. They're or, well, I mean, they were getting wastewater return, but I mean, as far as the supply of potable water, that's going one way. They're not cycling. They're just moving it and dumping it,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. And the treatment and the regulatory and the monitoring requirements are vastly uh, easier than in a building where you may have the surface to volume ratio is huge compared to what you have in a city or a distribution, a plumbing distribution system. So there are certainly efforts under AWWA, ASHTO, and I believe ESPRI that are looking at that as maybe there should be either a change to or an addition to the certifications for water treatment operators, treatment system operators, and their public water systems to have either additional skills or a different certification altogether in order to be able to operate building water systems. And I think it's frustrating, and we shouldn't have to do it. But I think we're finding ourselves that we will need to treat individual building water systems in order to maintain um, good building water quality, whether we want to or not. Where we have outbreaks, where we have obvious problems that just really stand out, that has to happen. I think as we move forward, especially with efforts to fix and repair and upgrade our water systems across America, even while we're doing that, that may take 10 or 20 years
Yeah,
to
this is a
do that.
monumental task. I think, like,
It,
for example,
it,
like Manhattan, New York
yeah,
City. I mean,
I would not want to
everything
be.
that stuff's hundreds of years old, and it's buried under literally, you know, tens, maybe even hundreds of feet deep in the ground under structure and, you know, just the way it's built up. And that's probably the case with many of the older municipalities in the country, right?
Yeah, they say in Atlanta they come across even still wooden pipes, and they're still part of the water distribution system. Um,
Seriously?
yeah, yeah. So, but they chlorinate the tar out of that water for sure.
Uh,
New Orleans, they treat their water well. Surprisingly, there's a lot of things that don't go well in New Orleans or water treatment. I was shocked to see how much chemistry ends up at the buildings. But they'll tell you that they think maybe half of the water that they treat actually makes it to a water meter
because of their loss?
because they're leaking that much. And I actually got to observe some of this during some construction down in the French Quarter.
Hmm.
Yeah, you could hear it running out into the surface waters, which run their way right back to the Mississippi. But
See, and that
that is their
raises
water.
another issue. I mean, that's another issue outside of what we're speaking about, but the fact that we are globally starting to lose our water supplies, drinkable water. I mean, look at the Colorado River Basin, it's down to what, 25% of what, they'd like to see the levels at. So
I
wasting water doesn't seem like a really good idea right now.
Well, I think the importance of safe, abundant, and quality water escapes a lot of people. It's kind of the magic that goes into making a civilization or the city. We often don't realize that without abundant and safe and quality water, uh, we can't build our homes. A ton of cement consumes over 1,300 gallons of water. Maintaining and cleaning a hygienic environment. Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, they closed schools because they couldn't flush toilets, couldn't wash hands. Um, Hospitals were threatened because they couldn't keep the cooling towers running in order to keep air conditioning within the hospitals operating. Electricity, you've got to have good quality water before you can put it into that steam turbine engine, or you'll destroy that power generation facility. Hospitals and long-term care facilities, they don't operate well for very long without a lot of water. Hygiene, drinking, showering, and almost as important is coffee. It gets me going every morning. And one of the things you'll learn if you look into Starbucks is just an example. That's a national um, coffee chain that, as just to operate and be at any location, they have to install a standardized reverse osmosis 3-part filtration system in order just to have the same consistent quality water, so that they have the same taste, and two, so they don't destroy their actual equipment, because creating
Sure.
steam and heating water will rapidly destroy that equipment or make it non-functional. So it's in every aspect of our daily lives, whether it's the big things or the small things, and water quality and the abundance and availability of water. Uh, it, it is a cornerstone of all healthy indoor environments.
And it's scary too. If you take a total dissolved solids meter, or TDS meter, and look at what comes off of tap water, just the amount of material that is in that water, it's kind
Well,
of alarming. It makes
I'm
you want to have an
actually,
RO system at your house. I'll tell you that.
yeah, if you can afford to put it in everywhere.
Right.
Um, and that's an area we're actually putting together a session or a presentation on, what is in your average as well as your poor water quality 8-ounce glass of water. And I think, we'll bring that to you, and have a little show on that later on. But I think most people, if they saw the laundry list of chemicals and microbes and pathogens and radionuclides that are in that glass of water, it would be pretty eye opening.
Well, and especially how we treat our wastewater, right? I mean, because there is a cycle, right? I mean, in municipalities, water, what's supposed to be safe drinking water is distributed out, and then dirty, nasty water, sewage, and everything's brought back and it's treated. But they really don't they just treat mainly for some pathogenic bacteria? I mean, there's all the chemicals and things that maybe find their way in there, spent pharmaceuticals and every other darn thing that gets in there. There's not an awful lot of removal of that, is there?
Pharmaceuticals, there's little to no removal of those, and how those degrade and pass through that system. Uh, where it's been studied, it's not pretty. You could argue the point that wastewater and sewage treatment is more regulated than the municipal water, the water that we drink. And it may make people feel warm and fuzzy, and feed their green oats that, hey, let's just reuse all of our water. But until we can treat our municipal water and have higher confidence in it that it is truly safe and healthy, and we're not creating additional problems, I think we need to maybe slow a little bit on recycling and intentionally using uh, wastewater for
But we
drinking
also,
water.
but I mean, again, you look on the West here, just the United States. I mean, the fact that we're in drought mode and severe drought mode, it seems like we have to expedite the process of finding ways to save water. I mean, because this problem seems to be getting progressively worse and at a steady pace, or actually an
Yeah.
escalating pace. It's like, um, yeah, water.
I don't know. I don't know I'm certainly not a prognosticator of how we're going to solve these problems, but
Oh, you
we're
are
not going to
too.
solve them if
Stop
we
that. You
don't
always make
recognize that we
predictions.
have them.
You've made tons of predictions on previous shows, so don't punt here and now. It's like I don't know. I don't. I won't
Well,
allow it.
my prediction would certainly be that we have many problems that need to be solved, but we cannot even begin solving them until we acknowledge that we have them, and
That's the first step.
that's the first step in the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and certainly, i- you know, obviously, it's paramount, right? Safe water. I mean, however you define safe. I mean, you don't live without it.
Maybe that would be a good start. Is that we actually define it
Define,
instead
yeah,
of
define what we'd like to have.
yes,
You know.
yes, that would be a very good start, and then recognize that safe for you may not be safe for me, and what's safe for me may not be safe for another person. So it's not an extremely useful standard. It's risk. What is the level of risk that you have? What is the level of risk that is present? What are the levels of pathogens or chemicals? What type of risk are we dealing with? And so the word safe, while it may be comforting for somebody to say that, isn't extremely useful as a regulatory or endpoint for monitoring of health risk.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally concur with that. Um, and again, but we have, there's starting points here. Obviously, we spoke about the Legionella issue, the ongoing Legionella problem globally, but it's much even deeper than that, right? I mean, just basically getting water the way it should be is kind of important. Um, so I'm not necessarily sure we're going to have any answers in the immediate future to all this, but um,
Well,
thanks
I,
to the
I
work
will
of,
say
but
that
thanks to the
that
work of people like you and and your colleagues in the industry, at least you're bringing some of this to the forefront, so we can at least you know
we're
talk about
we're
it. And
trying, and many of the colleagues that I have, and on all fronts of this, we're also watching the U.S. EPA 6-year review of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that is
that's
again
currently happening.
that
That's
is currently happening. Is they have some committees together, and they have some agendas and some abilities to at least see the process in which they're reconsidering uh, the disinfectant and disinfectant byproduct rules, actually looking at maybe requiring some testing or monitoring and regulation of Legionella and Pseudomonas, and then also the monitoring of disinfectant byproducts and additional byproducts in the water. But a lot of people don't recognize or realize that the implementation of the disinfectant byproduct rule very may well have had an adverse effect and increased the rate of Legionnaire's disease. Certainly, the disinfectant byproduct rule stage one and stage two implementations happened coincidentally at points where the rate of Legionnaire's disease jumped dramatically
hmm.
from year to year. And that has not been um, transparently examined.
And
When,
why
when,
why do
when
you
I
think
brought
that's
this
the
up
case?
to people in the industry, it's been a bit of you can't say that, you don't have enough data to say that, and you know what if it's true? What I think it's worth looking at. It seems to
Right,
be a
right. I
bit
mean,
frightening.
you're not saying that it's the case. You're saying this is, something maybe suspect we should look at.
Yeah, you reduce the amount of chlorine going into the water, which is what you're relying upon,
Mhm.
and you have more outbreaks of disease. Might be worth looking at.
It could actually have something to do with each other, certainly.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, we've got a long way to go. Uh, it unfortunately, I think, is going to be in left to the devices and left in the hands of healthcare facility operators, building owners, and operators. And for the time being, it's not going to get much better because we have water restrictions, which, here's another big surprise, just about every effort to save water and conserve water, both within buildings and within building water systems and within municipal water systems, also increases the risk of pathogens. So,
Oh boy.
yeah, yeah, it just keeps getting better.
I've got you over time now, so we gotta wrap up
Yes.
because we did close, and I'm sure you probably have like at least 50 clients that are not really pleased that you're late. But I want to mention you'll be back on the Healthy Indoors Global Community sometime next month for an Ask Me Anything. Um, you agreed to it. We haven't posted the date yet, so but
Anything? I I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
all right. Well, I mean, anyway, the AMAs are something that if you are a member of the Healthy Indoors Global Community, you will have the ability to sign up for those. Actually participate in the live discussion. We've been linking a Zoom conversation with some of live virtual audience and watching recordings after and being able to comment on it. We just finished one yesterday with Jeff May, and if you do want to get those, the best way to get there is become a member of the Healthy Indoors Online Global Community. The community website itself is at global.healthyindoors.com, but healthyindoors.global, which is kind of confusing and reversing. And I can't even keep up with this myself, David. But healthyindoors.global will actually show you how to become a member. I mean, if you get those words, just get Healthy Indoors and then you'll be fine. Not
You
a
will
problem.
find
So,
it.
yeah, it's there
Use
somewhere.
the Google machine, and we'll get
It's
it
there,
there.
it's there somewhere. So again, really like to thank our guest today, Dr. David Kraus. Again, and I do believe you're reigning champion for appearances on the Healthy Indoors show, which is a good thing. So again, David, your company is Healthcare Consulting and Contracting 3. Well, it's HC3 is the acronym, Healthcare Consulting and Contracting, right?
That's right.
In Tallahassee, Florida. There's your
Yep.
website, hc3.fl hc3fl.com. I said it wrong. I didn't put the wwws in. That's it's given. We
That's
all
so
know.
passe.
Yeah, we all know
Well,
that.
thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we've been informative and entertaining today.
I think we have, and again, we're gonna have you back. There's a lot more to talk about. We opened up many cans of worms and Pandora's boxes here today.
My favorite hobby.
It really is. You really are a master of chaos.
Well, thanks again.
David, great having you. All right. So we will be back again next Thursday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time for the Healthy Indoors live show. Join us there, but also go to our websites again, global.healthyindoors.com. We'll get you to all the back episodes. That's available publicly. You don't actually even have to be a member of the community to access all the past episodes of the show, as well as all the um, past issues of the Healthy Indoors magazine publication, which we've been doing since 2013, 9 years of that now. A lot of that stuff hanging out there. So, really good information. We'd like to see you there soon. Checking it out, becoming a member in our community, being part of what we're doing. We're looking for all of you to help us make this bigger and better and more informative. So, until next week, my name is Bob Krell. Again, I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine, and stay healthy. We'll see you soon.